No joke. I have to say that because your instinct is going to be to not believe me. No joke, a literal axe murderer is set to be released from prison in Minnesota. And if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear why. After that, I'm going to try a new segment where I react to a few YouTube shorts from the likes of Tim Pool and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Seriously, some of the best single-serving philosophy can be found on YouTube shorts, and I'll give you some examples. Welcome to Closing Argument.
4, 3, 2. Closing Argument with Walter Hudson.
So, yeah, a literal axe murderer, a guy who at the age of 16 murdered his entire family, including his parents and 2 younger siblings, is going to be released from prison in Minnesota after Democrats passed a new law that allows even the most violent offenders to qualify for early release. My Minnesota House colleague, Representative Matt Bliss, summed it up this way. That law created the Earned Incentive Release Credit Program, allowing inmates to reduce their time served through participation in rehabilitation programs. Critically, it was applied retroactively, meaning violent offenders who accepted plea deals under the expectation of serving life sentences can now be released early. Many of those deals likely would not have been offered or accepted had early release been a possibility at the time. Now, make no mistake, this is literally like releasing Jason Voorhees from prison. This guy is quite literally an axe murderer, and he's going to end up walking the streets of Minnesota as a direct result of a law passed by Minnesota Democrats while they held a trifecta. But the crazy doesn't stop there. That law, which enables the release of this axe murderer onto Minnesota streets, was passed by a 1-member majority in the state Senate, and the deciding vote was Democrat State Senator Nicole Mitchell. Nicole Mitchell was just convicted of felony burglary. So you have a convicted felon who was the deciding vote on a piece of legislation that is now enabling the release of an axe murderer. Truth truly is stranger than fiction. Now, when I pointed this out on Twitter, I got some indignant pushback from a prominent Minneapolis Democrat named Julius Hernandez. Hernandez objected to my characterization of Democrats enabling the release of an axe murderer, saying, "This is exactly the kind of bad faith rhetoric that poisons any real conversation about justice. No one values a murderer over their victims. Claiming Democrats support axe murderers is dishonest, inflammatory, and meant to divide. You know it isn't true. Blanket statements like that are the root cause of division in our politics. It's beneath you, Walter." Now, I'll spare you the back and forth which ensued between us after that post. Suffice it to say, this is a textbook example of one of the left's most insidious rhetorical tactics. It's not their fault that the policies they support have certain outcomes. It's your fault for noticing. It's your fault for pointing it out. You're the one who's weird for connecting the dots. And above all, you're expected to judge them for their intentions rather than their outcomes. This follow-up post from Hernandez highlights the point. He writes, "You keep pretending this bill just lets murderers loose when the truth is it only applies to people convicted as kids. And even then, they don't walk free. They get a shot at parole after decades behind bars. That's not freeing anyone. That's called justice." Now look at some of the phrases used there. You keep pretending this bill just lets murderers loose. As if that's a minor detail. As if there's some context which justifies that. It's an astounding thing for someone to say. He says it's not freeing anyone when it literally is. That's the whole point of the law and what its actual effect is. That's the only reason we're talking about it. And the most shocking claim in that post is that letting an axe murderer who has a life sentence out on Minnesota streets is somehow justice. This whole scenario effectively highlights why it's so important to dig beneath the surface of rhetoric to understand what people actually mean when they use certain words. At face value, calls for justice are universally respected. We all want to see justice done, but we don't all mean the same thing when we use that word. For me, justice is a balancing of the scales. In the case of David Brum, he should be dead. He should have been executed after what he did. He took the lives of 4 people, and not just any 4 people, but the 4 people closest to him, his own mother, his own father, his younger siblings. There's no just reason why he should be allowed to continue drawing breath. But because we live in a society which has foolishly rejected the death penalty as an appropriate form of punishment, he was instead given a life sentence. And while that sentence may not meet my definition of justice, it at least imposes a heavy price for a heinous crime and keeps Brum from ever being able to harm another innocent person again. But even a life sentence, is too harsh in the eyes of leftists like Hernandez. You should be able to kill 4 people, your own immediate family, spend a couple decades thinking about what you did, and then get a second chance. That's how the left views justice. Not as a balancing of the scales, but as the rehabilitation of criminals, no matter how heinous their crimes were. It all reminds me of when my bill to impose harsh sentences on 3-time convicted violent felons was heard in the Minnesota House. Here's how that discussion went down.
This bill is really focused on punishment, and I just want to look at these types of considerations with a bigger lens.
We're talking about people. We're talking about victims. We're talking about perpetrators. We're talking about human beings doing things to other human beings that should not be done. And what are we going to do about that? And again, what this bill says is that when you get your 3rd violent felony conviction, we're done. We're not playing anymore. I past that point, I don't know if I care if you ever become a productive citizen, because you have opted out of productive society. Your 3rd violent felony conviction? I don't know how interested I am in making sure you get educated and you get at that point, you're talking about a chronic dysfunction in a person's ability to be a member of society. And past that point, it is the responsibility of those of us who govern society to protect everyone else, to protect everyone who is functional, who isn't harming their neighbor, who isn't violating the rights of others. I'll give you some stats that I know are solid and that from a source that I know you trust. And I won't disclose the particulars of where I got this from, but I think you'll know when I tell you. I had a meeting this week with somebody who works with juveniles. And he presented me a folder that was about as thick as one of our statute books. The documents inside covered the crimes committed by only 6 juveniles. Those 6 juveniles, over the course of the last 18 months, are personally responsible for 174 separate victims. 174 separate human beings, real human beings, whose lives were touched in an inappropriate way by the actions of these kids. That's an average of 29 victims per kid. Now, at some point, our consideration properly should be the 174 as opposed to the 6, right? All the concern of the current trajectory and momentum of our public safety conversation in the state seems to be upon the 6. What do we do about the perpetrators? What do we do to make their lives better? What do we do to put them on the right track? What about the 174 victims who somehow figured it out? They somehow have managed to go through their lives without hurting other people and stealing from other people and harming other people. We're just going to let their rights be violated because we're so deeply concerned about the folks who are perpetrating against them. And look, there is a middle ground. I know I'm getting a little heated because I care about it. There is a bullseye somewhere between the restorative practices and trying to get people back to where they need to be in order to be productive members of society and actually protecting the public from the terrible things that these people are doing. And I would like to think that providing an enhanced penalty for somebody who has 3 violent felony convictions hits right in that bullseye. This is what we're dealing with in Minnesota. I mean, my biggest challenge as a state legislator is to remain relatively calm as I respond to some of the most insane ideas imaginable. I mean, imagine thinking that someone who has been convicted 3 times of violent felonies can or should be rehabilitated. Imagine thinking that's the priority. The priority is not keeping the public safe. It's not holding the perpetrator accountable. The priority in the left's eyes is making sure that the perpetrator somehow turns their life around and becomes a productive member of society. Now listen, I'm not entirely callous to the idea of rehabilitation. I do believe that people who commit crimes which warrant them serving a limited term in prison where they will eventually be released back into society should be rehabilitated, both for their own sake and the sake of the community. But that's not my top priority. My top priority is ensuring that the public is protected from predators and that those who commit crimes are held accountable in the true sense of the word. Because accountability is another word which means totally different things depending upon who you're talking to. To normal people, it means facing the music and doing the time. To the left, it means simply acknowledging what you did and promising to never do it again. In other words, they've confused grace with justice. And look, I'm a Christian. I love grace. I owe literally everything to grace. If it weren't for grace, I'd be going to hell, and I deserve it. But the interesting thing about God's grace is that while he offers it freely, he doesn't bestow it unconditionally. God requires you to acknowledge your sin. He requires you to acknowledge your need for grace. And even then, even if you accept his grace and confess your sin, he still doesn't shield you from the consequences of it. We don't let inmates out of prison because they came to Jesus, or at least we shouldn't. If we let people out of prison, it should be because they have served the appropriate sentence or are otherwise eligible for parole based upon demonstrable good behavior and reformed character. But there should be a proper limit even to that. There are certain crimes which shouldn't afford the perpetrator the opportunity to be released. And wherever that line is, I certainly think that taking an axe to your mother, father, and siblings is on the wrong side of it.
All right, now for a little something different. I'm going to take you through a few YouTube shorts that caught my attention and that I want to share with you and then provide a little bit of commentary. These are some really interesting insights that I think you'll appreciate. Let's start with a clip from Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of the state of California. I think sometimes we forget that. He ran as a Republican and governed as a Republican. He's widely viewed, I think, by a lot of the grassroots today as extremely moderate and perhaps belonging properly to the other side. But this insight really solidifies his position on the right and as a Republican, and I think it's something we should take seriously. Let's take a look.
When I came over here, it was 19, 20 million people in California. Well, they built 6-lane highways. So now when you go to 40 million people, you would know mathematically now you need 12-lane highways, meaning 6 lanes, and then on top of it, you build another freeway, right? So that you don't have traffic congestion. But that's not what they did.
Right.
Then when you have to, when you go from 20 to 40 million people, then you need twice as many houses.
Yeah.
You need twice as many apartment buildings. You need twice as much of everything. Schools and everything. And they didn't. They didn't take care of them because the environmentalists thought that if we say no growth, then no one will come. But in the meantime, no one gives a shit about that. They come anyway. When the prices go up, the value of the apartment building goes up. So the unit that used to cost $600 now costs $3,000 a month. Yeah. But the salaries, the wages didn't go up accordingly.
Yep.
So now you have people that are economically homeless. They cannot afford paying for their rent anymore. So this is created by the politicians. And now remember what Einstein said, the people that created the problem cannot solve it. So they are doing the same thing over, which is another thing Einstein said. If you try to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity.
And it feels like that's what we're living.
So this is what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And this is something that is a point that I think is underappreciated in modern society, certainly in our political discourse here in the United States, and definitely in the state of Minnesota where I reside, is that anytime you prioritize, quote unquote, the environment over the well-being and thriving of human beings, the people who are going to get hurt are the people at the lowest end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And that's not just disadvantaged or underrepresented people. That's children of the middle class, children of the upper middle class, like any child. No child starts off with a huge pot of money unless they're a trust fund baby or something along those lines. Like most kids start from zero and they have to earn their keep. They have to go get a job. They might have debt as a result of going to college. And for them to be put in a position where the current average age of a first-time home buyer is 38 here in the state of Minnesota, that is a policy failure. It didn't used to be that way. We didn't used to have homes that were so far outside of the reach of normal people who make normal decisions about how they ought to live. But that's where we're at now as a direct result of policy that's informed by people who are already comfortable because they've already made it. They've already got their house. They've already got their 401k. They've already got their career. They've already established themselves. And now they have the luxury to push back against the people who are coming behind them and to disadvantage them in order to make themselves feel virtuous about their impact on the planet.
There's some famous people being suddenly accused of touching some girl's knee, and suddenly they're being dropped from their program or something. Garrison Keillor, I don't know if you know who he is.
Radio sort of star, yeah.
Extraordinary writer. He was listening to a sad story from a female friend of his, and at the end of this, he put his hand to her back like this to,
console.
And she had a blouse on, and it was her bare back. And he immediately took his hand away and apologized. And she said, don't worry about it, forget about it. Anyway, they went their separate ways. He emailed her because he was concerned.
Yes.
Apparently he has a thing about physical touching.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
Months later, he gets a call from a lawyer, or his radio station does, Minnesota Public Radio, saying he inappropriately touched this lady. And he was dropped like that. Because when you're doing a play and you're with your family, other actors, you do silly things. And it becomes kind of superstitious. If you don't do it every night, you think it's going to jinx the show. It's childhood stuff.
And that's just it, is we've gotten to the point in our society where normal human behavior that's not at all predatory, not at all harassment, in no way inappropriate, is capitalized on for, in the case of Keillor, maybe there's a litigation incentive there. There might be some bucks that somebody can earn as a result of it. But whatever the motivation, it is inherently unjust. Predating upon innocent incidents in order to, number one, make a buck through litigation, and number two, perpetuate this idea that we live in a rape culture, quote unquote, which a lot of folks on the left claim, completely unsubstantiated, is harmful to society, and it's harmful to relationships. People are going to be less likely to be empathetic. They're going to be less likely to listen to your story. They're going to be less likely to care what you think if they suspect that any outreach that you make on your part to try to establish relationship or engage in relationship might in fact be a trap for them to come back and litigate against you later or otherwise ruin your life.
You say the left is a cult. I can do the same thing with the right. I can say they're completely insane. Look at these nutbags on Twitter.
You'd be wrong.
Really?
Yeah. The popular vote winner, Donald Trump, was a Democrat. RFK Jr., former liberal. Tulsi Gabbard, former liberal. Elon Musk, former liberal. Tim Pool, former liberal. I never voted Republican. I didn't like Republicans. And now the Republican MAGA movement, not the neocons, is an eclectic bunch of diverse views which debate each other. Charlie Kirk, Christian conservative, invites moderate pro-choice Tim Pool onto his stage stage to discuss those views to the public. On the left, what do you think would happen if you went and opposed their views at a public forum? You'd be threatened with violence. Booking liberals to come on my show.
We have the same problem. They don't want to talk.
I can sit in front of a libertarian like Dave Smith and Charlie Kirk at the same time, and we leave with beers in our hands, smiles on our faces. And Dave will say, Charlie, I really do appreciate it. I think you do good work. I know we disagree. The left doesn't do that. They firebomb your building. You could not define what they believe. It's impossible.
Yeah, and this is something we've all experienced. I mean, I remember as a teenager and a young adult, I had friends from across the political spectrum, and politics was not the primary consideration of whether or not you hung out with somebody or whether or not you liked them, whether or not you had something in common with them. You could have somebody who was hippy dippy and somebody like myself who was a staunch conservative, and you could go out to the bar, you could have drinks, you could have fun, you could go see a movie, you could hang out, you could talk about life, you could talk about your relationships, your family, your job, your dreams, and it wasn't controversial, and it was possible because people were more open to each other. And what's happened as a direct result of the inquisitorial left and the impact that they've had on the culture is that you now have a group of people on one side of the political spectrum who have completely written off the rest of society. They believe that they are morally superior, that they are clean. It's like pharisaical. It's like the Pharisees in the Gospels, who they believe that they are so pure and righteous.
There was a study that I found pretty exciting. They said the part of your brain that you get anxiety from is the same part of your brain that has gratitude. You can't be grateful and anxious at the same time. So then in the Bible where it goes, instead of being anxious, be grateful.
It's so, when you told me that,
crazy to think that they were calling out legitimate things that scientists have found out about.
Yeah, and this is something that I say on a regular basis, that there's basically the political divide in our nation can be fairly summed up as those who live in gratitude and those who live in grievance. And you can't do both. If you are grateful for the life that you have, you're not going to be focused on and harboring these grievances. And if you're trapped in this mentality of grievance and oppression, you're never going to be grateful for anything. And that, broadly speaking, is the political divide in our country. There are people who they wake up angry. They wake up upset. This is why, as one of the previous videos talked about, the response to disagreement is often violent, or at least rhetoric that incites violence or advocates violence, because the grievance produces this sense of justification for making things right in whatever way possible.
That's it for today. For X subscribers, YouTube channel members, and audio podcast subscribers, be sure to check out my supporter-exclusive bonus show, The Smoke-Filled Room, where I get more personal and cover a broader range of topics. Today, I'll share my uncensored take on what is necessary for Republicans to win in a state like Minnesota. The environment has never been better, but the task is still an uphill challenge. Subscribe now for immediate access. Take care.